Hey y'all, today I'm going to talk about how to prepare to apply for 501c3 status, and we're going to talk about 7 things you should have ready to go before you submit your application. Let's get into it. Hey y'all, this is Tiffany with Boss on the Budget. I help new and small nonprofits get up and running. So if you need help with your nonprofit or you need help raising money for your new nonprofit, you should be subscribed to this channel because I drop videos every single week. And today I'm going to talk about 7 things you just need to have handy when you're ready to apply for 501c3 status. Now, a lot of the videos that I have recorded already pertain to 501c3 status, but I wanted to share a video about what do you need to have handy, especially if you are doing it yourself. And I did talk about this in another video. Should you do your own application? Should you get someone else? So I'm linking that above, so make sure you check it out. But even if you're working with an organization that's doing it for you, you still need this information. So I'm gonna go through 7 things you should have handy when you're ready to go ahead and submit that application. Now, just keep in mind that there are 2 different applications. There's a 1023-EZ and then there's the 1023 form. Now the 1023 form is the long form, so the EZ is the streamlined version. So you're gonna need to produce more information with that long form than you would the EZ. So just keep that in mind as I share this, and I'll try to point out if there are any differences as I go along between what you need to have for each form. Now, if you've never heard of the 1023 form or you're completely confused about what I'm talking about, then I linked another video that can give you information on how to apply for 501c3 status. So this list is not in any particular order, but absolutely these are things you need to have handy. So the first thing is your articles of incorporation. So typically, if you're a 501c3 nonprofit, you are a nonprofit corporation. So you actually have to start at the state level first by creating your business entity. So your Secretary of State's office usually is the office that you will go to figure out how to apply to start your business. That's essentially what you're doing. You're starting your nonprofit business. But in most states, there's a specific type of business you have to start. So it's a nonprofit corporation, non-stock corporation. It may have different names, but you need that articles of incorporation to get started, right? And so without that, you really should not be applying for 501c3 status, because what business are you attaching it to? So you start there. You need to make sure you have that handy. And in your articles of incorporation, there is particular language that you have to have if you're applying for 501c3 status. So I talk about all of these kind of details that you need to know when you're getting started in a nonprofit startup masterclass. So if you're interested in learning that process and understanding why you make certain decisions in the beginning, what the IRS expects of you as a nonprofit, really important information that every nonprofit founder should know, then make sure you check out that masterclass, and I'm linking it below. Number 2 is your employer identification number. Okay, so before you apply for 501c3 status, you need to get that number first, because you're going to actually list that number on the application, and that's how they identify you. And once you're approved, that becomes your 501c3 number. So you absolutely need to have that number first. All you have to do is go to the IRS website and apply for it. It takes 5 minutes. It is free. I talked about this in another video. You should not be paying for someone to get your EIN for you. It is completely free, and it's a really simple process. You just identify that you're a nonprofit organization, and then you go through the remaining questions, and it's really not a lot. So that's the second thing you need to have, your employer identification number. Number 3, you need to have a board in place. Now this is a tricky one, right? And so I can't go into all the details of how do you get a board? What if you don't know anybody? I don't want a board. I only had to list one person on my articles of incorporation. So can it just be one person listed as the board? Those are all detailed questions. I can't get into this video. I've shared in other videos that I'm linking below. But I will say this: when you are applying to get 501c3 status, you have to list your board on that application. And you should. I recommend that you put at least 3 people. And the IRS needs to see that there are people who are holding different offices, the chairperson, secretary, treasurer. So you need to identify who those people are. So I know a lot of you are like, this is my solo thing. I don't really know anybody. I don't trust anybody. I don't want to put their names on the application. So that's a whole nother conversation that we need to have later. But essentially, you need to list someone or some people, at least 3 people, on that application. All right. Now you do have the opportunity when you submit your annual information to update those names. So don't feel like just because you submitted an application that you're stuck with those people, but just keep in mind that you need to have that ready when you're applying, okay? Number 4 are your bylaws. So your bylaws are like it's the governing document for your organization. And it really does speak to how the board is to operate, how the board makes decisions, how the board is elected, all those kind of things that govern how you all act in your position, right? So remember that as a board member of a nonprofit, you're legally and you're ethically responsible for the decisions made by the nonprofit. And so those bylaws kind of speak to the rules of how you all are supposed to do things, right? So you need to make sure you think about your bylaws and they have enough detail so you don't get in sticky situations and you don't know how to proceed. For example, how do you remove a board member? What's that process like? How do you add board members? How long should board members serve on the board? Those kind of questions should be answered in your bylaws, among other things. So here's the thing. You don't necessarily have to have your bylaws in order to apply for 501c3 status, but it's a good idea at least to have some bylaws in place. And this can be very state specific as well. So your state will likely have nonprofit law or some kind of code specific to how nonprofits are supposed to operate, and they may speak to things like board term limits and how you elect people, how you remove people. So when you're creating your bylaws, just make sure it follows the rules of your state so you can make sure you're in compliance. Number 5, you need to have some sense of a budget or like some kind of projections for your organization. Now, why am I saying this? I'm saying this for a couple of reasons. One of the simplest reason is that if you are interested in filling out the 1023-EZ, so the streamlined version of the 1023 form, you may be eligible to do that if you're not going to make over $50,000 for the first 3 years, right? If your receipts that you bring in for your organization don't total more than $50,000 for the first 3 years. So if you are projecting that you're not going to make that much money, then that's one of the eligibility criteria for being able to submit the 1023-EZ, which is way easier and is more streamlined and it's cheaper. So you need to know that. You need to understand how much money you're trying to make. If you're filling out the 1023 form, you're going to have to fill in some projections. You're going to have to understand some of your financial data. So if you've been operating for a while, you're going to have to submit past financial data, and you're going to have to project out in future years as well. So you just need to have a sense of where you think your money is coming from and how you're going to make that money. And the other reason I'm saying you need to have a sense of a budget and a financial projection of how you plan to make money is because it just makes sense. It's smart. It's strategic. So you should never approach your nonprofit assuming that the money's just going to come. That is such a mistake, and you really put yourself in danger of burning out, in danger of really going broke because you think that nonprofit status automatically grants you something. Now, what it does grant you is a promise of a lot more work. So you're going to have to do the work to become more visible, to raise money systematically and regularly for your nonprofit in order to survive. So 501c3 status does not automatically give you anything. So it's just smart to think about, how do we plan to make money? How much do we plan to raise? How much do we plan to spend? Having all that budget information together before you apply for 501c3 status. Number 6, you should have some idea of what your mission is. So every nonprofit should have a vision statement and a mission statement. So your vision is kind of what you want the world to be when you complete all the tasks that you have before you, right? Like, what's the end state? What is the outcome of everything? It's your big goal, right? Your mission is basically how you plan to get there. And your mission is a crucial statement because it's one of the most used, most said, most written statement that you're going to write or say as a nonprofit founder. So you need to be really clear on what you do, who you serve, and why you do it. That's essentially the mission statement. You probably missed it because I threw it out there real quick, but don't worry because I have a video on it where I share my formula. But really, it's just who you serve, what you do, and why you do it, right? And putting that in a succinct statement so people can get it right away. You should know what your mission statement is just because that's how people resonate with you. That's how people figure out whether or not they want to support you. But also you have to list your charitable purpose in the application. So you have to let the IRS know what you plan to do and what are your activities, because you're going to have to list that in the application. Now, they don't actually want you to just by rote put your mission statement in the application, but they want a sense of the types of activities that you're doing so you can be categorized as a certain type of nonprofit, but also to make sure that it aligns with their definition of a charitable organization and you meet the qualifications of being a 501c3 organization. And the last thing you should have ready when you're applying for 501c3 status is some of your baseline board policies, right? So there are certain policies that the IRS is going to ask you about that you should have handy, right? And some people don't realize this at all. And some people start their nonprofits and are doing their nonprofits for years before they realize they're supposed to have certain policies, or it's good practice, right? The IRS may ask you, do you have this policy in place? And even if you say no, you can give an explanation or kind of explain what you do in these situations, right? If you don't have a policy, then what is your practice, right? Because they want to know how you're managing things like conflict of interest. But there are definitely certain policies that just make sense and are good governance from the sense of the IRS that you should have. Things like your conflict of interest policy, a whistleblower policy, and a document retention policies. Those are like the baseline. They're not the only ones, but they're the baseline policies you should have in place. Now, again, I share some of this information in my Nonprofit Startup Masterclass, but I also go into detail about different policies and committees that the board should be managing. And I have that also in a board's masterclass. So if you need kind of breakdown from that perspective from the board, you can also check out that masterclass. So all in all, like there are certain things you just need to have handy, or they're some of the first steps you need to take before you decide to proceed with 501c3 status. And some of the things that I mentioned, like I said before, you can get by with having not done them, but it's just smart to do them, right? It's just smart to have this in place because there's so much you can miss starting a nonprofit, because there's so much that people just don't know. So the more prepared you are, the better. All right. So thank you so much for watching. If you need more help with your nonprofit, make sure you visit me at www.bossonthebudget.com, and I will see you in the next video.